Ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We're grateful for the opportunity to be present in this land. My name is Bijan Ahmadi, and I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy, IPD. On behalf of IPD, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the third annual Middle East Strategy Forum. We have received around 400 registrations for in-person and online participation combined. We're excited to welcome you all. Allow me to take a moment to briefly introduce IPD. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank specializing in international affairs with operations both in Canada and the United States. In Canada, our mission focuses on three core objectives: to provide our decision makers with strategic insights, analysis, and policy recommendations grounded in evidence-based research and prudent realism, to facilitate the exchange of knowledge between Canadian and international scholars and policy researchers, and to identify, educate, and nurture the next generation of Canadian policy leaders who will help our country strengthen its position and advance its interests on the global stage. The Middle East Strategy Forum, initiated by IPD in 2021, is designed as a multidisciplinary forum to encourage constructive discussion and formulate actionable policy recommendations concerning geopolitical, defense, and security dynamics in the Middle East. We're pleased that in just 3 years, MESF, this conference, has evolved into a highly regarded and recognized platform among prominent scholars, diplomats, and policy practitioners in Canada and beyond. We owe this success to our sponsors, who have placed their trust in us and provided the necessary financial support and investment. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank the sponsors for this year's conference: the Minds Program at the Department of National Defense, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, the Connection Grant Program, and the Open Society Policy Center. I would also like to extend my gratitude to my team at IPD, who have put together this program for us today. Special thanks to my friend and colleague, IPD Deputy Director Younes Zangi-Abadi, who also serves as the lead organizer for the Middle East Strategy Forum. We gather at a pivotal moment of transformation in the Middle East. While the United States remains a paramount security player with an unparalleled military presence, the dominance of the US-led regional order has undoubtedly waned in recent years. This evolution away from unipolarity presents both risks and opportunities that are actively shaping the Middle East's current geopolitical reality. As the United States shifts its strategic focus towards the Indo-Pacific, largely to counter China, and as Eastern Europe understandably demands America's attention and resources due to Russian aggression against Ukraine, traditional U.S. allies in the Middle East are increasingly concerned about the durability of Washington's commitment to the region. This concern about America's role, combined with the steep toll of regional tensions and conflicts in the past 2 decades, has galvanized regional actors into action. This has led them to increasingly take matters into their own hands to address shared threats and tackle regional challenges. The Abraham Accords, the potential for Israeli-Saudi normalization, the Iran-Saudi rapprochement, the restoration of ambassadorial ties between Egypt and Turkey, and the newly announced India-Middle East-Europe corridor all serve as compelling examples of this trend. While the influence of external powers, external great powers, are clear in several of these examples as well, these developments illustrate the region's growing awareness of the need for de-escalation, integration, and cooperation in order to address not only security concerns, but also vital issues such as economic development, connectivity, climate change, water, and food security. The regional transformation has further accelerated by the increasing regional influence of the People's Republic of China. The PRC has forged strategic partnerships with most countries in the Middle East, becoming the top trading partner for key players, including U.S. partners like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. China's Belt and Road Initiative has also made significant infrastructure investments across the region, including in Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, Iraq, and other countries in the region. China's growing presence in the region offers, on one hand, new economic and development opportunities, as well as new avenues for diplomacy, such as the role that PRC played in brokering the deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. On the other hand, Beijing's increased influence has emboldened U.S. adversaries like Iran, allowing Tehran to evade U.S. pressure and sanctions while also expanding its nuclear program and continuing its support for proxies and militias across the region. The China-U.S. rivalry is not the only external factor influencing the regional geopolitical landscape. The Russian aggression against Ukraine has had major ripple effects for the region. With around 50% of the MENA region's food being imported, disruptions to agricultural supplies from Ukraine and Russia, coupled with rising energy prices and economic stagnation, have triggered what the UN World Food Programme has labeled as high levels of acute food insecurity, affecting approximately 53 million people across the region. In addition, Moscow has deepened its military cooperation with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Tehran has supplied Moscow with thousands of drones that are being used by the Russians in their daily attacks against Ukraine. Washington and Tehran's rivals in the region are concerned that Moscow, in exchange, will provide Iran access to advanced military technologies and equipment that may affect the balance of military power in the region. Despite these consequences for the region, Middle Eastern countries have broadly refrained from joining the West in pressuring Moscow for its aggression against Ukraine. In light of these unique developments, one overarching question remains. Looking long-term, will the advent of multipolarity yield increased stability for the region, or will it exacerbate tensions and make the Middle East another front in the intensifying great power competition? Our esteemed speakers will explore this critical question throughout today's discussions. Here in Canada, our national interests dictate that we prioritize our focus and our resources on the Arctic and the Indo-Pacific. Ottawa has also significantly supported Ukraine and enhanced its presence on NATO's eastern flank as part of its commitments to its allies and partners. However, Ottawa also has a clear strategic interest in a stable balance of power to be maintained in the Middle East. Tensions and conflicts in the region can undermine our security and the interests of our allies and trading partners. Through its Middle East engagement strategy, Canada has invested over $4 billion from 2016 to 2022 to enhance regional security and stability and provide vital humanitarian assistance. The Canadian Armed Forces have also extended their presence in the region through Operation Impact, providing capacity building, training, and assistance, particularly to Iraq, Jordan, and Lebanon. Given our sustained presence in the region, it is crucial for Canadian decision-makers to understand the evolving strategic landscape of the Middle East. This will ensure that we engage constructively in this complex region with realistic goals and objectives. We hope that today's discussions will contribute to this understanding and lead us towards updating our Middle East engagement strategy. During our program today, we will cover some of the most pressing issues affecting the Middle East region, from the dynamics of great power competition to the intricacies of regional diplomacy, and from the challenges of nuclear proliferation to the delicate balance of interests and values. We aim to explore the full spectrum of risks and opportunities in the region. As we embark on a day with learning and dialogue, let's bear in mind that the answers to complex questions often emerge from nuanced discussions. Let's not shy away from difficult questions. It is through constructive dialogue that we identify common ground and pave the way for a better future. Now, to start the first session, please allow me to introduce Mr. Gordon Venner, who will moderate our first session with Major General Greg Smith and Colonel John Summerfield. To highlight just a few of his roles in his distinguished 40-year career in public service, Gordon Venner previously served as the Associate Deputy Minister of National Defense, Assistant Secretary to the Cabinet for Foreign and Defense Policy in the Privy Council Office, and Assistant Deputy Minister for the Middle East and Afghanistan in the Department of Foreign Affairs. He also served as a Canadian diplomat, including roles as counselor in the Canadian mission to the European Union, as an ambassador, and also as an ambassador to Iran from 2004 to 2006. Please join me in warmly welcoming Gordon Venner and our speakers for the first session, Major General Greg Smith and Colonel John Summerfield. Thank you.
Well, that was a pretty thorough overview of the whole agenda. So we could all probably just go home now, I guess. All done. I just have to be a little bit afraid of everything that we're expected to discuss in the next 50 minutes. I'm not sure how we're going to fit all this in, so I'm going to keep things going as quickly as I can. We'll have a short address from General Smith, followed by another set of remarks from Colonel Summerfield, and then we'll have a moderated conversation that hopefully will take us about 25 to 30 minutes. I get to start by introducing General Smith, and given the time constraints, I'll keep this very short. Major General Smith is the Director General for International Security Policy at the Department of National Defense. In that capacity, he is the latest in a long line of highly accomplished general and flag officers to hold that position. This is a job to which the Canadian forces assign their top performers. In that position, he is also ideally situated to speak to us today about the challenges in the Middle East, and just as importantly, about the broader consequences of events in the Middle East for the rest of the world. So with that, I'm going to ask him to start us off, and I'm looking very much forward to what he has to tell us.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Venner. Top performer, my name's Smith, so he must speak English as a first language. We'll see how that goes. So good morning. I'd like to thank the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy for inviting me here today, and all those who are attending in person online. The Middle East Strategy Forum provides a needed venue for security experts, academics, and policy professionals to discuss complex topics and share ideas. Indeed, for such historic, complex, and geopolitically dynamic regions, I'm a vocal advocate for doers and thinkers to work together, realizing that's a bit of a flawed analogy. You do, I think, but nevertheless, we need to work together. Outside of open warfare, the demands on the Canadian Armed Forces have rarely been higher. These pressures stem from technological, environmental, and geopolitical factors on top of a military experiencing a personnel shortfall. Both at home and abroad, climate change is affecting the frequency, duration, and intensity of Canadian Armed Forces operations, placing unprecedented demands on our resources. This year, the Canadian military conducted 8 operations to respond to provincial and territorial disasters, resulting in 131 days of continuous operations. I doubt that trend will change. And again, 131 continuous days of operation, not deployed externally in Canada. Domestic emergency operations have negatively impacted the human capital of the Canadian Armed Forces, as more frequent and severe natural disasters often coincide with training schedules, drawing personnel and resources away. This adversely affects our readiness and the ability of our forces to deploy. As training is sacrificed to address these urgencies, the reconstitution of our personnel become even more difficult. Climate change also places greater demands on military assets in the Canadian Arctic. As climate change drives greater interest and activity in the North, the Canadian Armed Forces will be increasingly called upon to assert Canadian sovereignty. You'll regularly see me taking these pauses. This is a rhetorical flourish. Oh, he's shifting his theme now, which is first of many here. Due to strategic competition and the rapid advancements in technology, such as advanced cruise missiles, hypersonic weapons, and diffuse threats in space and the cyber domain, North America no longer enjoys the same degree of protection from threats by virtue of our geography. These threats have forced us to rethink our approach to deterrence at home, including investing over $38.6 billion over 20 years to the North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, alongside our American allies. In this global security environment, safeguarding Canada and North America from emerging threats will support our ability to be engaged globally, and to come to the aid of partners and allies overseas without being held at risk at home. Moreover, the proliferation of commercial uncrewed aerial systems threatens both Canadian Armed Forces members and the deployed forces of our allies, partners, and commercial shipping companies more than ever before. On February 24th, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In the year and a half following the full-scale invasion, Russia has committed atrocities against Ukrainians and attacked civilian targets, violating international humanitarian law. Canada remains committed to supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes, continuing to provide Ukraine with the necessary military assistance, training, and support to defend its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and democratic future. But in Europe, Canada does more than support Ukraine. The Canadian Armed Forces' largest mission is currently deployed in support of NATO's assurance and deterrence measures. Canada has committed $2.6 billion and to increase the 1,100 strong existing battle group, and we're increasing it to a brigade, 4 times as big, and will deploy up to 2,200 Canadian military personnel in Latvia until 2026. This is in addition to the nearly 400 Canadian Armed Forces personnel posted in Europe and North America in the NATO command structure and its force structure. In November 2022, Canada launched its Indo-Pacific strategy, laying out a whole-of-government approach to the Indo-Pacific and showcasing Canada as a consistent and reliable partner in the region. The Indo-Pacific strategy sets clear defense objectives, calling upon the Canadian Armed Forces to increase and diversify its regional presence, allowing for greater engagement in support of the rules-based international order and upholding peace and stability. Thus, in this era of emerging technology, climate change, and multipolarity, the demands placed on the Canadian Armed Forces are significant. The Government of Canada over the past 2 years has announced major defense initiatives for continental defense, European security, and increased presence in the Indo-Pacific, all while responding to disasters at home. Considering all these tasks, what about support to Middle East regional security? The region is going through a dynamic shift, and indeed that was described, but I'll go through my version of this. Daesh's so-called caliphate has been militarily destroyed, and the diplomatic success of the Abraham Accords has opened the door to new cooperation that, until then, seemed impossible. Further, as the Western world emphasizes other geopolitical regions, Russia and China have sought to increase their presence. So let me unpack these strategic challenges or changes to the region. In 2014, Canada joined the Global Coalition Against Daesh as the terrorist organization established its so-called caliphate across Iraq and Syria. The Canadian Armed Forces' contribution to the U.S.-led multinational military operation, known to them as Operation Inherent Resolve, or entitled Operation Impact for Canada, and worked with Iraqi security partners in a broad effort to defeat Daesh in Iraq and Syria. Canada's contribution evolved from an air campaign to providing advice and assistance to Kurdish and Iraqi security forces as they stabilized their defenses from Daesh's attack, and subsequently supporting our partners as they undertook offensive operations to liberate their territories. This meant greater emphasis on special operations forces and people like me working in Allied headquarters. At the height of Operation Impact, 850 Canadian soldiers, sailors, aviators, and special forces operators were deployed to the region. With Daesh's so-called caliphate declared defeated in 2019 and no longer holding terrain, our allies and partners shifted from a more active role to capacity building and institutional development, and Canada has followed militarily suit. The Abraham Accords, talk about the Abraham Accords. In 2020, Israel, through the United States, achieved a master stroke that few dared to predict. The Abraham Accords normalized Israel's relations with 4 partners, namely Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and UAE. These agreements, following other peace accords with Israel's neighbors in the past decades, opened the door to new cooperation. Hopefully other countries in the region will take steps to join this accord. Now, of course, I'm not the Middle East expert. I think you are, actually. But this regional detente has changed the geopolitical mood music in the region. The result of decades of political evolution, one could not imagine the contemporary military situation to be like the events of, look at the military history of the 40s, 50s, 60s, etc. The security situation in the region has fundamentally changed. Finally, for geopolitical factors, the Middle East does not exist within a vacuum. It is indeed affected by great power competition. Russia and China seek to deepen their ties with countries in the Middle East as Russia tries to extricate itself from isolation caused by its invasion of Ukraine, and as China seeks to establish regional influence and energy security. So, what for Canada's strategic military operations? Canadian activities in the Middle East region are based on a whole-of-government Middle East strategy launched in 2016. This strategy and its resourcing have evolved in line with the regional security situation. Like allies and regional partners, Canada has shifted its efforts towards capacity building and technical advisory while consolidating our footprint, reducing the number of personnel deployed on Operation Impact, coherent with the strategic picture and the long evolution of the mission. To do this, first, Canada continues to deploy military personnel on Operation Inherent Resolve and NATO Mission Iraq. The later, Canada led as a non-combat advisory and capacity building mission for the first 2 years of its operation, from 2018 to 2020. And we also support the Alliance's decision to expand NATO Mission Iraq, including involving the mission's role to advise the Iraqi Ministry of Interior. Canada also maintains its capacity building programs in Jordan and Lebanon, but I will let Colonel Summerfield get to that with more detail. But Canada's engagement with our Middle East partners is much broader than Operation Impact. Since 2002, Canada has deployed assets to the 38-member naval partnership known as Combined Maritime Forces, or CMF, headquartered in Bahrain under Op Artemis. The Canadian Armed Forces also have personnel deployed with the United States Security Coordinator, or USSC, quietly doing important work supporting the Palestinian Authority under Operation Proteus. Further, there are forces in Sinai, Qatar, Golan Heights, and the Israeli-Lebanon border. Further, Canada's military is improving interoperability and regional relationships. Both matter, especially during times of crisis. Canada has deepened engagement with partners, and indeed the Department of National Defence has signed defence cooperation agreements and memorandums of understanding with Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE. Most notably, after 5 years of diplomatic freeze, Canada and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia have reappointed ambassadors to each other's capitals. And indeed, I was at the Saudi reception last night. Very nice. In a multipolar world, Canada strives to nourish and deepen relationship with its partners in the Middle East. Like other allies, Canada retains the ability to surge resources to the region in time of crisis. Canadian military maintains the Operational Support Hub, or OSH, in Kuwait, which provides Canada additional flexibility. The importance of this organizational flexibility and the importance of relationships was evident during the evacuation of Canadian citizens from Sudan earlier this year. Canada worked with its traditional allies, such as the United States, the United Kingdom, and other NATO members, to evacuate our citizens. But we also relied on regional partners for access, basing, overflight, and indeed evacuating our citizens. Okay, coming to the big finish here. But what about Iran? Iran's actions abroad, including weapons proliferation and malicious cyber activity, continue to threaten international peace and security and demonstrates the country's complete disregard for the rules-based international order. Iran's actions extend beyond the Middle East theater. Iranian entities and personnel have sold weapons to the Russian Federation and provided Iranian military personnel to train and assist Russian forces on the use of these weapons. Moreover, the indicators that Iran is smuggling ballistic missiles and weapons into Yemen abound. The United Kingdom has presented evidence to the UN linking the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to the smuggling of weapon systems in violation of a UN Security Council resolution. All these actions directly threaten international security. At home, Canada condemns Iran's ongoing human rights abuses against its own population, the use of violence against citizens, and the systemic and continued harassment and repression of women by Iran. Recently, the Government of Canada announced further sanctions against Iranian entities. However, as evidenced by recent regional détentes, Iran and regional partners understand that open hostilities would be catastrophic to their interests, with which we fully agree. We await tangible results from these diplomatic initiatives, hopefully that Iran will use diplomacy and dialogue to solve issues, rather than resorting to measures that undermine international security. So as a conclusion, the geopolitical map of the Middle East has evolved significantly in recent years. The defeat of the Caliphate, the signing of the Abraham Accords, re-engagement with Saudi Arabia, increasing multipolarity, they're all indications of a changing region. As the Middle East changes, Department of National Defence, Canadian Armed Forces will work with its Global Affairs Canada and allied partners to review our defence policy. Canada has adjusted its commitment to this important region, just like our allies and partners, to remain a reliable partner in the Middle East through partnership and continuing presence and engagement. Canada must take a focused and measured approach to these defence initiatives. The Canadian Armed Forces must balance its commitment in the region while also ensuring that we are not seen as abandoning or our regional partners as they continue to contend with an evolving landscape. Meanwhile, there are many competing demands for personnel, resources, and strategic attention across the world, in Canada, and the challenges of reconstitution. Through our work with allies, capacity building initiatives, existing operations, and defense diplomacy, I'm confident that Canada will be a valuable partner for years to come. Thank you for your attention and your thought leadership on this important aspect of Canadian defense activities. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, General. I hope during our discussion shortly we'll be able to get into a little more detail about the question of how we situate the importance of events in the Middle East in the context of other global challenges which seem to be exploding all around us. It's now my pleasure to introduce Colonel John Summerfield, who is the commander of Task Force Impact. I thought I might just start by sharing with you a secret. You may have often wondered where the names come from for military operations. There's Op Impact, there's Op Reassurance, there's Op Jade. It's a little bit, it's not exactly transparent. It's a little bit like naming hurricanes. And I will give you one small tip, and some of you will know this, but if you've ever looked at the names carefully, you'll notice this. Frequently, the first letter in the name of the operation will give you a clue as to what country the operation is in. So Impact starts with an I, principally focused on Iraq. You get the idea. Op Jade is in Jordan. It's not 100% because sometimes you have operations that cover more than one international domain, and sometimes you have all you know is the first letter, and that doesn't tell you whether the operation's in Azerbaijan or Algeria or Afghanistan. But I'm pretty sure that Colonel Summerfield will have much greater insights to share with you. But I thought if I left that one with you, you might take it away and remember it. Colonel flew in from Iran at 3 o'clock this morning. So not only are you going to get ground truth here, you're going to get extremely valid and active ground truth. Actually, I think you came by way of the U.S., didn't you?
I came through from Kuwait to the U.S. to here.
Kuwait, okay. So he's going to speak to you this morning, and he will have some operational comments to make about what we're doing in the region, and then I think he'll specifically with respect to Op Impact, and then he's going to broaden that out a little bit to talk about Canada's role in the region. I will let him get to it, and we'll come back to have a question and answer session after that.
Good morning. I would like to thank the Institute for inviting me to speak today. It's quite an opportunity to come back to Ottawa and to do this in person, and the timing was right, and I'm just happy to be here to address everyone here in the crowd and those online. It's funny actually how you mentioned how the names, we're actually going to be changing our name to Task Force Middle East in the very soon future in order to actually encompass the fact that we are spread across many countries. We're actually the mission itself is across 6 different countries in the Middle East itself. If they were a star alliance, I'd have lots of air mile, but they're all independent airlines out there. But I spend a lot of time bobbing in and out of all the countries, trying to get a better understanding of the region. General Smith, thank you for your comments and paving the strategic space. For my part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my perspective on it. Really, it's going to come down to really 2 different themes. It's one, the larger perspective as I see it from where I sit in the Middle East, and then just I'm going to talk about Operation Impact, the job that we're doing in the Middle East itself as Canadians. So to contribute to the scene setter, as everyone knows, the Middle East is a dynamic region. It is not one that is frozen as a status quo. It is full of vibrant cultures and communities. There is a lot of diversity in the Middle East. While global attention might be getting pulled in other areas, the Middle East remains one of extreme strategic value. The Middle East remains a critical source of energy, Many nations rely on the oil and gas that is produced in the Middle East for their economies, and there are high volumes of trade that transit and come from that region daily. Security is an everyday consideration for trade in the region. It cannot be separated. Regional states rely heavily on military power to maintain the conditions and grow their economies. Both militaries and militants are highly active in planning and conducting tactical operations across the region. Properly employed militaries act in support of legitimate governments, in support of established rules-based international order. Improperly employed militaries or militants act to discredit and undermine legitimate governments, to erode the norms, the rules, and the conventions that make up the international order. The Middle East is not shielded from global strategic competition, as has been mentioned. We see Russia is mainly concentrated on the war in Ukraine, but we see also that it's had a direct impact on their actions in the Middle East itself. On the whole, we have seen a reduction of activity from Russia within the Middle East. But it may be reduced, but it has definitely not disappeared. We see that Russia continues its commitment in bases in Syria. We see it has increased its interference in the level of provocation in Syrian airspace against U.S. and coalition aircraft. Most importantly, we see a dramatic increase of arms importation and cooperation with Iran, both seeking international and economic partnership and modern military hardware. We also heard about China. China continues to make gains in the regions grounded in its Belt Road Initiative. Although China's focus is mostly economic, military support and integration has increased in the recent years. The region also has a number of influences that affect their security that are regionally based. We heard about Iran. Iran has increased its attacks on commercial shipping. It has increased support in terrorism and proxies. We see weapons proliferation and malicious cyber activity. We see actions that threaten the peace and security of the Middle East and beyond. We see that Daesh has been military defeated, but it has not disappeared. Their ideology persists and remains a threat both within the Middle East and beyond, most notably in Africa. There are other violent extremist organizations that continue to pose a threat to stability and security in the region. The Middle East is also grappling with threats that challenge human security, refugees, migration, water insecurity, the effects of climate change, border security, the effects of illicit trade and drugs, such as Capagon and other narcotics. Economic pressures are all areas where the region and international militaries are involved in some way. We continue to see crises erupt in countries. Two recent examples are Sudan and Niger. Canada must engage and be prudent and have prudent planning to help us face the unknown. We need military partners in the Middle East, in the region that we can turn to and support us and provide us assistance when we need to manage unforeseen incidences. So Canada has been in the Middle East since 1954. Over those decades, we have seen Canadian soldiers, sailors, aviators, special forces members deployed in a whole host of different tasks and roles throughout that time. Though the total numbers have varied from year to year, depending on the roles and the demands that we've faced, the CAF presence in the Middle East has been constant. Right now, we continue to contribute across the region. Under my command, as I said, we are in 6 different countries. There are also other elements involved in other countries, which General Smith outlined. For OP Impact, we are in Jordan and Lebanon. We're conducting bilateral security partnership and enhancement activities. We are in Iraq, contributing to OIR, Operation Inherent Resolve, as well as NATO Mission Iraq, with 76 partners, which has a dual role of advise, assist, enable, and capacity building of the Iraqi defense, as well as soon-to-be Interior Ministry. We also have Op Foundation. Op Foundation is centered in Qatar, which is embedded in the U.S. Central Command's Combined Air Operations Center, known as the KAOC. It's not very often that I say the whole name out. We call it the KAOC. And they're contributing to the command and control of all air power from Northeast Africa to South Asia, alongside 21 partner nations. We're also contributing in Op Artemis, which is down in Bahrain, supporting combined maritime forces, which is focused on countering illicit non-state activity and upholding international laws of the sea in the Gulfs and the Indian Ocean. We also have CAF members embedded in the U.S. Naval Central Command. So that's a snapshot of where we are today. But Canada's military role in the Middle East is one that has been in constant change. Our focus has shifted from peacekeeping to combat operations, to kinetic counter-terrorist activities, to indirect activities like building partnership capacity and contributing to maintaining regional security. Operation Impact illustrates the most recent evolution of CAF's role in the Middle East. As a commander, I'm just going to take a couple minutes to just go through a bit of what we do and provide you a little bit of my perspective. So Operation Impact has been focused principally on the coalition to defeat Daesh since 2014. At its height, as a general outline, we had up to 850 people contributing to that mission. We commanded the mission from 2018 to 2020, where we had 250 CAF members deployed as a command team, as a force protection company, advisors, trainers, mission headquarters staff, and a helicopter detachment. Earlier this year, the government announced the extension of Op Impact until 2025. We are also going to be consolidating our footprint in the Middle East and in the region. Our long-term interest is to reinforce the capacities of our regional partners. Today, Canada needs to balance multiple priorities. As the General had mentioned, there is an increased demand for the CAF in the world, whether it's contribution to NATO, whether it's Indo-Pacific, or whether it's at home responding to the increase in natural disasters at home. So our footprint in the Middle East is changing to reflect this. As the task force commander, I'm responsible for developing a plan to use our resources more efficiently and more effectively, all the while continuing to deliver on the Government of Canada's intent and direction. Our focus is on maintaining the operational outputs and upholding the commitments to our allies and partners in the region. So we're posturing ourselves to remain committed and consistent, ready to react and to readjust if future needs require different or additional resources. So right now, we're focused on continuing our current level of commitment to Operation Inherent Resolve and NATO Mission Iraq. We're going to continue filling a key number of staff roles in both of those missions centered on building capacity within Iraq itself. We have our two bilateral missions in Jordan and Lebanon, which are Canadian Train and Assist Teams, otherwise known as our CTATs. We're going to continue working to build capacity and enhance our security partnership in those regions. A couple of examples of what we do is we conduct workshops, we train, we mentor, we coach in the laws of armed conflict. We are enhancing women, peace, and security with the Jordanian Armed Forces, attempting to assist them to build and integrate a female company within their quick reaction force brigade. We're introducing new skills and building new capabilities as we coach and mentor and provide infrastructure to the Lebanese Armed Forces. We are focused with the Logistics Brigade to try to establish a technical school, teaching, maintenance, and support skills to its personnel. But we still have work to do. We can improve ourselves. We could take a more deliberate, forward-looking approach to capacity building. We can streamline our processes. We can become more efficient and consistent so our partners can predict our support a little bit better. We can also continue to provide key leaders and staff to regions across the region, whether it's in the KAOC or it's in the CMF in Qatar and Bahrain within coalitions. We are going to maintain our operational support hub in Kuwait, which is a critical enabler for CAF activities across the region. We are currently in the process of consolidating our infrastructure at Camp Canada in Kuwait. We're looking at installing new and efficient more infrastructure that can better withstand the extreme elements that is the desert of Kuwait, and which actually takes fewer people to maintain. So by investing a little bit into a better infrastructure, we can reduce the purse demands and contribute to CAF reconstitution. Within my headquarters itself, we're going to rely more on digital technology, reach back, which we all learned how to do during the pandemic. We're going to do what was impossible 3 years ago and rely on the lessons learned to make things possible now with fewer people and become more efficient. Virtual presence and information sharing will reduce the requirements for in-theater personnel, but it will not impact the overall mission itself. To conclude, the CAF is posturing itself to be able to remain committed and consistent, ready to respond and readjust should the future needs require it. Our military contributions to the coalitions contribute to Canada's foreign policy goals and ensure reciprocity with our peers and allies. Our presence, our investments in training, capacity building, our collective contribution with allies prevents a vacuum in the region that can be exploited by others. Our contribution to enhancing regional partnership is developing independent capacity for self-sufficient military capabilities, albeit slowly in some areas and more quickly in others. The Government of Canada remains committed to its allies, to its partners in the Middle East, to contributing to regional security and to upholding international order and laws. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. You've given us a great many places where we could dive into the deep end and context of the Middle East today. But I thought I might start with one subject that I don't think either of you addressed. It's been more than a decade since the Arab Spring washed through the region. The Arab Spring, as you all know, was a series of uprisings which sought to create both more democratic countries and countries which were more democratic. So all these years later, I'm curious on your views on this question. Where are we now in the development of democracy in the countries in the Middle East? How robust is that democracy? How durable is that democracy? What are the prospects for greater democracy in the countries of the region? Colonel, I remember some of the work that was done in the early days in the operations in Iraq. And at that time, we were considering things like using the Canadian form of the federations to advise on issues like Kurdish autonomy. And I wonder, is there, in addition to asking you to take a look at the question of the status of democratic development in the Middle East, are there opportunities in the region for Canada to further contribute to that development? So I'll let you both take a swing at it, but maybe...
I'll go first, or I can...
I'll try something.
Okay.
So let me think. You got a defense person in front of you here, so clearly I'm going to look at this from a defense perspective. One more shift that's occurring in that region, which gives us more pause to sit here and think about it. And I tried to, in my overly long speech, talk a little bit about what are some of the geopolitical major movements, and I could describe this one as another movement that's occurring internally. I'm fortunate I get to defer to my global affairs colleagues, Global Affairs Canada colleagues, in looking at some of those aspects, because of course defense is a subset of foreign affairs. They have the bigger perspective of what is the relationship that Canada wants to have with these countries, and therefore then ask us from a defense and a security perspective, what can we do to help? And actually we have a relatively fresh MC. That's how government communicates and funds, is a memorandum to cabinet. It's relatively fresh. And actually, as much as I loyally execute whatever they give me, I think it was very well done. We just described how busy we are, and government turned around and said, you're right. Now drop the number of forces, drop the amount of resources you need in that region. So we're doing that. In fact, the Colonel's in the process of going through that right now. But that equally gives us pause to continue to review, and I think that's one more aspect of, as I can only imagine, democracy is a bit of a long march. It's not something that's going to change quickly, although we saw some efforts perhaps earlier in the Arab Spring. That gives us pause to continue to look at that further aspect of geopolitical transition and say, based on that, is there more that defense can do? And that's us to go back to government and constantly review and see if that's another aspect that gives other opportunities in the region for us to help in that bigger global affairs Canada perspective.
Colonel?
Okay, so that's a hard question. Where are we with respect to democracy? I'd suggest that the Middle East itself, from my perspective, touring around the region and talking with the partners in which I engage, it's slow reform is what's happening across the region. And we could see it mostly in the reform and the adoption of Western values. It's not only democracy, but the things at which democratic countries uphold. Things like gender diversity, laws of armed conflict, things like that, where we're seeing that there is headway being made within the region, and we see it in the militaries which we're participating in and actively engaged. So a couple examples: gender reform is very new to the Middle East. We're actively engaged in Jordan and in Lebanon. But we see it also in a number of other countries. In Kuwait, we see it in Iraq, and we also see it across northern Africa. In many of those states, where we're actually seeing that there is a slow reform happening. They're grasping with it. They don't necessarily know how they can. They see the inherent value of it from a military perspective, but they don't. But there's a lot of cultural clash going on between those in the military that are reformists, that see the value of integrating women and all the benefits that it has, and the overall culture and the larger political climate. With laws of armed conflict, I think that we've actually seen a much larger improvement in the region. It is a much more it's much more thought of. It is actually a consideration, whereas 20, even 10 years ago, it was not. So we see that democratic values are starting to bleed in to the experience. However, I will say that it is not universal. It is in some region it is much more successful than others, and I think that it's based that the fact that the Middle East is not one culture, it's not one country. There are many diverse backgrounds in there. There are many different states that have monarchy right to a democracy in Lebanon. But the democracy in Lebanon is one that's fragile, that we've seen, and it's affected the work that we've seen as well with the Lebanese armed forces. Political instability is ripe in the Middle East right now, so the march towards democracy, I think, is going to take a back seat to solidifying against all the human security issues that are so strong across the region, which I had talked about during my address. I think that's...
Thank you. Back in the days when we were in Afghanistan, we talked a lot about the 3 Ds, defense, diplomacy, and development, and how all 3 pillars had to be pursued at the same time. Point that was frequently made that if there was no security, then there really wasn't a path forward to democracy or even to economic development. So I'd be curious, from your perspective right now, is the degree of security, is the degree of stability that you've been able to achieve sufficient to allow for democratic and economic development? Or are we caught in a catch-22 where we can't get democracy without security and we can't get security without democracy?
I'm going to start with this one, and then the regional guy can get into that a little bit more. I looking at it, and I think it's reflected in our Middle East strategy, the world has changed. I mean, I'm not that old, but if you go back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, etc., militarily, it's a very different area. We don't see open warfare. Conflict is not what it used to be. And indeed, the Abraham Accords, I have not traveled that much in the region, but has changed the temperature, whatever the best analogy is. It has changed the region. Economic opportunities are widespread. We see accelerating trade. And so is there a continued geopolitical friction? Yes. I was very fortunate last year to go to the Manama Dialogue in Bahrain. And so we Westerners sitting here, we look to the West and go, oh, Ukraine, yep, and that's a threat. And we have NATO, and that's something we focus on. But going into that region was more of a dialogue of, that's a great Western problem. But let me explain to you Iran. Why are you not doing more about Iran? But as I described, the West, once upon a time, I served there as well, was very focused on a very kinetic operation against the Islamic State. Very kinetic. And they were militarily defeated. And then equally, the clashes that we saw between Israel and any number one of their neighbors, that is also in the long past. Now, there's continued instability, frictions, etc., but it is not the same era. So I think we actually have to reset our mind on what is the security situation, and that maybe it's time to look at that 3D concept and say, no, actually, diplomacy and development, or really just commerce, is much more important now. And there's a role for us, and that's reflected in the Middle East strategy that we have. But I think it's a time to put greater emphasis on those other two Ds.
Do you want to add anything?
I think the only thing I'll add is that I think that we're actually in a state of relative security, all things considering, in the Middle East. We're not seeing regional power competition being exercised through direct military action. But there are still destabilizers from the military point of view, from the security point of view, that exist and will exist for the relative future. Syria is by far the one of the largest destabilizers right now in the region. It's having a huge impact on not only Iraq's ability to return itself to a prosperous economy, it's also having impacts on Jordan. It's having impacts on Lebanon. It's creating human migration, refugees, in the tunes of millions of people in those two countries. It's also contributing to water shortages and to the political crises that exist across the region itself. Security is prevalent to reform. In my opinion, without having a secure, stable environment for people to push beyond survival, beyond the basic needs, in order and the basic requirements for the state to uphold itself and have the credibility to govern. I don't think that we're going to get to a lot of reform within the region itself. But on this, it is improving. We've seen a lot of dialogue that's been happening within the region itself. We have seen political instability go down, it's not flashing up right now. It doesn't mean it's not going to flash up in a month from now, but right now we see that it is trending in the correct way. But I don't think we can separate security from democracy, and I think that we're stalled for the time being on a lot of larger reforms.
Thank you. So, General, you mentioned the economic dimension of all of this. A long time ago, I had the pleasure of spending 4 years in Brussels on our mission to the European Union, and the Europeans constantly reminded us that it was the creation and the success and the expansion of the European Union that led to decades of peace and security and stability after the Second World War in Europe. In fact, peace and security in Western Europe that has remained, undisturbed to this day. In the early 1990s, I think, Shimon Peres said that the Middle East would eventually be pacified by economics and not by politics. that a growing degree of economic interdependence and integration would eventually make it just too difficult for countries in the region to pursue hostilities with each other. But I don't know whether Shimon Peres was wrong or he was just premature, but we haven't seen a lot of that. You're right. At the moment, there's signs of economic growth in the region, but an awful lot of that seems to be related to an increase in petroleum prices. Economies haven't diversified to the extent that you might have thought. Rail links are almost non-existent between countries in the region. So is there a hope for further economic integration in the Middle East? What would it take to make that happen, and how beneficial would it be?
I'll try first. Got a military dude up here talking about economics, so let's see how this goes. I've served in NATO. Obviously, the Marshall Plan was tremendously effective once upon a time to, amongst other things, drag Europe together. One can look at the origins of the EU and see it's pushing France and Germany together and saying we can't do that again. We went toe-to-toe 3 times, and we've got to stop. Now, there's a bit of a different analogy, I think, to the Middle East. But at the same time, and again, limited experience in the region, having visited somewhat, I hear from the people I speak to is that the Abraham Accords has changed the situation. It is, if nothing else, allowing greater economic connection. And I think you characterize very well. That's wonderful to say, but there are infrastructure and other relationship challenges that have to be overcome. And that's billions, trillions of dollars that is going to take to actually do that. That being said, we can look to the First World War, where nations went to war that had massive economic repercussions. They knew they had huge financial connections, and they went at it anyways. So we have to be careful of that, but I think, if anything, it's an economic opportunity. We have seen this, and again, I use the term deliberately, evolution. The conflicts that happened from the mid-40s on up has gone away. Now, there remains security frictions. Syria, Lebanon, we can go on. We just saw what happened in Sudan. There remains to be problems in the region, but I equally think there's a massive economic opportunity. And again, you don't have the right person up here to describe that, but I just look at the geopolitical factors, some which I tried to describe in my speech, and think that the opportunity for the region economically, if we get over the fact that there has been war in the past, nations can get past that and look to what is the true benefit to both the nations and their citizens if they economically work together.
I'll also put the caveat that I'm not an economist. I'm a military. I'm looking at it from a military lens. So probably what I'll focus on is for what I see. So we do see that there is a more integration that is happening across the Middle East from the way that we see it from our point of view. When militaries are cooperating with each other, it's also reflective of economies that cooperate, trade, and governments that cooperate with each other. So from what I see is that there is actually quite a good network across the Middle East of we'll call like-minded people that participate within different forums and are creating linkages together. Whether it's through seminars where they talk about CIMIC, which is civil military cooperation, or gender, or they talk about other larger security issues, we do see different Arab and Gulf countries coming together and sharing and their experience and trying to tackle issues from not a singular point of view, but from a regional point of view. Also on the NATO side, in Kuwait, there's a regional center. It's the NATO ICRC Regional Center, which conducts training with Gulf countries, and we see that it's becoming an area of more importance in the region. But what I will say is that there are a couple elephants in the room with regards to the region that need to be resolved first. There's the question in Syria, and then there's a question in Iran that are destabilizing the region itself. for the economy to grow, human security issues have to be improved. I think that's why there is a congruence, or at least from a military point of view, there's a need and there's a desire for cooperation, because there is the problem is larger than any one state within the region itself, and without cooperation, there can be no future. There's millions of displaced people, and climate change is an issue that is talked about on a very routine basis across the Gulf itself. The economic situation, I think, is reliant heavily on a secure and stable region, and for that, and that's why I think that there's some military cooperation that is continuing.
Thanks, Colonel. I have about a dozen more questions, but unfortunately I'm coming to the end of my time here. So I think I'll just end this with a final remark, and then there's still, fortunately, 2 more days of activity here in which a lot of these questions can get addressed. Back at the beginning of the Arab Spring, I remember going to a meeting in Brussels that was convened by the European Union just for lack of a better convener. And an awful lot of countries were trying to figure out how to help. The events in Tunisia and Libya had already taken place. Syria and Egypt were warming up in the wings. And countries, dozens of them around the table, each spoke one after the other. And almost every one of them started off with the remark that, boy, were we surprised. Nobody saw this coming. Nobody expected that one fruit seller setting himself on fire in Tunisia could set off, a firestorm across the region. And that went on for a couple of hours until finally there was an official from the United Nations who got the floor. And he just sort of looked out at the room with astonishment, and he said, "What are you people talking about? The United Nations has been producing the Arab Human Development Reports for 15 years. We've been contributing to them, and we have told you over and over again that this was going to happen. You have absolutely no right to be surprised by what is going on right now. It is largely a demographic issue, but it is not going to change." And listening to the two of you, provide your insights this morning has made me think that we have at least come a long way in that sense. I think we're better educated, we're better informed, and we're paying more attention every day to what's going on in the Middle East. And I don't think anyone will ever make the mistake again of saying, well, we were just totally surprised and shocked. So thank you for your efforts. Thank you for your service in the region, which is of tremendous importance to all of us. And thank you for your contribution this morning.